Hello, and welcome to a new episode of the Moral Revolution podcast. Hi, Tony.
Hey, Laura, how are you?
Great. It's great to see you. It's exciting to be here today. And it's particularly exciting because our guest today is a very, very special guest. Our guest is Aniket Shah. His current role, he's a managing director at Jefferies, the investment bank, and the head of their Washington policy and energy transition research, if I'm not mistaken. Sorry, Aniket, you can correct your official title when you get to actually tell us a little bit more. But the reason why this is really exciting is that Aniket and Tony and myself, we've been friends for about 11 years now. We've met each other in 2015 in that pivotal, really important year, 2015, the year when we were all working at Columbia University at the Earth Institute, actually at the time, doesn't exist anymore. At the Earth Institute at the time, we were all working in different capacities, covering slightly different topics, but under Jeff Sachs, who was the director of the institute at the time. And so I was covering more the climate related stuff. And that was the year that then led to the Paris Agreement. So that was some of the work that we did in that context. Aniket was focusing more on the finance for development, so the sustainable development agenda, and in particular, the finance angle for that agenda. And Tony was focusing on the faith angle. And so how to galvanize communities of faith in support of these different topics. So that's the year we met, and it's the year we became really good friends. And we all look back to that year with a lot of nostalgia, despite the many challenges
Absolutely.
of working at the time and also of just like the topics that we worked on. But the nostalgia for that time, and I think I can share with our listeners that the best aspect of that year was that we were working together and we would get to spend some time every day together sort of dissecting some of the world's biggest challenges and thinking about it and sort of bringing our perspectives in these conversations. And honestly, so we've been friends all this time. And I think one of the reasons that prompted this podcast is that we thought, wow, these conversations are interesting. There's so many different ideas. And so why don't we share these conversations with a broader audience and more friends out there? So that's one of the reasons that prompted this podcast. Now, Aniket is, unlike me and Tony, Aniket is still employed by a large financial institution. And so he can't do this podcast all the time with us, but we're super excited to have him today. And we're going to cover a topic today that's on everybody's mind, big topic, which is artificial intelligence. And Aniket has some really interesting perspective on it. And so we're excited for this conversation. And I just want to welcome Aniket to the podcast.
Laura, thank you. And thank you, Tony. I love you guys. I'm so happy to be talking to you on this forum. I love the fact that you've put this together. And what a gift to the world that the two of you are sharing your ideas on this platform to so many other people. You know, Tony and Laura did not ask me to say this, but I'm going to say it to everyone who's listening right now. There are no two brighter people that I know than Laura.
That's too kind.
And Tony is the most beautiful writer that I know. I mean, he has a gift of the written language, which is just incredible. Go and look at some of his speeches that he wrote for some pretty important people. Some of the most important speeches coming out from the IMF director were written by Tony. And as a good speechwriter, he'll never say that he wrote them, but I'll say that. And Laura was the brain, the largest investment firm in the world when they were actually really focused on sustainability. So I love working with you guys. I love talking to you guys. And thank you so much for having me. And I can't wait for this conversation.
Well, we love you too so much. So thank you, Aniket, so much for being here today.
Absolutely.
All right. So if I think that we can dive right in.
Yeah.
Aniket, I know that this is a topic, AI, obviously it's been at the top of mind of investors for the last 2.5 years and counting. We know that it's driven a lot of market movement, both in good ways and in bad ways, and a lot of concern around what it means, what the technology means, what it means for a lot of different things, what it means for the future of employment and labor, in particular, educated, white-collar employment, what it means for the future of the energy system and the power system in particular, and infrastructure and water and all the tensions around those resources that come to light because of the use of energy and water by these technologies, in particular through data centers, some of the bottlenecks, etc. Financial markets, the high concentration in most market indices driven by the crazy explosion in value of some of these companies. A very small number of companies, 5 to 7, drive 50 to 60% of the returns of the S&P 500. At least that was the case. I think it's even more concentrated today. So there's a lot to talk about. And so, yeah, I'm super excited to have
Yeah.
you, Annika. You've been doing a lot of really interesting work on this. So why don't you get us started?
Sure. Laura, thank you. This is a topic that, to be honest, I came to a little bit late. I wish I had started thinking about AI 3 years ago when ChatGPT first was released. To be honest, I wish I'd positioned my personal portfolio as a result of it, but better late than never. And so we have spent the last, I would say, year and a half really trying to really understand what's going on and not just understand the technology, but understand the implications, as you say, on the broader economy. The first thing that I just want to start with is that AI is not a new technology.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's just important for everyone on the call here to realize that the Turing test, the famous Turing test of deciding whether a machine is smarter than a human, that test was proposed by Alan Turing in 1950. That was
Yeah.
75 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote my PhD was inspired a lot by the work of Herbert Simon, who was this Nobel laureate economist at Carnegie Mellon. And he wrote that machines would get to human-like intelligence. This was stuff he was writing about in the 60s and 70s. You'll all remember that the moment when the IBM computer beat Garry Kasparov in chess, that was 1997. That was 30 years ago. The AlphaGo moment when, that very difficult Eastern game of Go, that was 13 years ago. So the first point that we always like to start with a little bit of a historian's lens, is that this isn't different. This isn't new. This is the next chapter in that evolution, and that we have come to a new moment now because of computing power that is really extraordinary, and of course, some fundamental breakthroughs in terms of how this technology is now given to us as consumers. So point number one is that this isn't new, and understanding the history. And by the way, Laura and Tony, when you read that history, you also learn that there have been periods of enormous excitement, and there have been periods of enormous sort of plateauing of AI in the past. Like there have been these AI winters that people like Gary Marcus and others have written about. So that's point number one. The second sort of starting point for me about this topic, which I just find amazing, and I would love your thoughts on this, is that I have never seen a topic in my life that has such a wide variety of opinions in terms of its implications as this one. I have never seen it. I have never seen a topic where you have some people who think that AI is going to lead to the end of the world. You have some people who think that AI is going to lead to absolute utopia. And you have some people who think it is just normal technology, that it is just part of the technological evolution. There's some disruption, there are more jobs gained, and we just sort of hum along. And the chart that I'm just going to quickly put up for those of you who are watching is just a chart that we came across a couple of months ago, but it is now animating the press. Chart from the Dallas Fed, which I'm just putting up on screen now. And the first thing that is important to note is this is actually published by the Dallas Fed. So this is not like, this isn't the Citrini research report, which is some random group of 10 people. This is the Dallas Fed. That in front of you, I have this chart of their AI scenarios. And what it does is it shows the three scenarios that I just highlighted. The first scenario is that the world goes down business as usual. And just what the chart shows is it is on the x-axis, it is years. On the y-axis, it's GDP per capita in log scale. And what it shows is that over the last 160 years, GDP per capita has grown at roughly 2% per year through wars, through depressions, through new technologies, and so on and so forth. So scenario number one is that we continue down that path effectively. Maybe there's a slight productivity improvement. So instead of 1.9%, it's at 2.1%. There are a lot of great economists who think that's the path that we're on. It's just normal technology. The funny thing about this chart is that are the two other scenarios. So the second scenario is that we hit the singularity and GDP per capita exponentially rises to infinity. And remember, this is a log chart. So a line up like this is not just an exponential, it's an exponent on an exponent. So it's a line straight up to the moon, is the way you should think about this. And that's that we hit the singularity, which means that machines become smarter than humans and we all become infinitely rich. And the third scenario is we hit the singularity and GDP per capita goes to zero because we all die. Or GDP per capita growth goes to zero. No, sorry. GDP per capita goes to zero because we all die. And in a way, that is the moment that we are in. That's what everyone is trying to figure out. Is it business as usual? Is it some major disruption up or is it a major disruption down? So that's the second sort of framing point that I wanted to make. And then the third framing point that I wanted to make, you guys are you've set up a discussion about morality and
Yes.
economics. And the question is, in a moment of such uncertainty, what do we all do? Like, what decisions should investors, corporates, governments make? And that's the one that everyone's now figuring out. The news over the last few days has been remarkable about what some companies are,
Yes.
their interaction with the Department of Defense and this. And this is the ultimate set of moral questions, I think, because again, the Dallas Fed chart, we could end up into utopia or the world could end. So maybe we should be having these kinds of conversations. So we did a call this week with around 1,000 clients, Laura and Tony, about this. And my bottom line, and I'll stop here, but my bottom line to our clients was social reactions and political constraints can restrain a technology.
Right.
And that we shouldn't just think just because there is a technology, it should just be allowed to do whatever it wants. And by the way, that's not how humans have thought of technologies in the past.
Right.
Yep.
There's always been a way of controlling it. And so I tried to put out this argument that there will be a reaction. And maybe it's not the reaction to the technology, but it's a reaction to the fear of the technology. Because perceptions are reality. And I'm anticipating more of a kind of backlash to AI than I think most people in the market are. So anyways, that's sort of some early thoughts on this, but I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts. And maybe just if I may, I want to turn it back to you guys because two of you are the actual economists in the room. What do you think? Let me maybe Tony, start with you from the official sector perspective, although you don't obviously represent the IMF, but you've been around that world for 20 years. What do you think the discussion is like inside the halls of the IMF right now? And then Laura, for you, I'm genuinely curious from the investment world, also from the group of people that you are interacting with, the morality, the theology world, how are they thinking about this topic right now?
Well, I can start. So I've been doing a lot of research on economic history, and I find a very useful book about this is Darren Acemoglu and Simon Johnson's Power and Progress, two Nobel laureates. And they discuss the history of technological progress since the Industrial Revolution. And, there's been ups and downs. There have been times when technology has really hurt workers. The first 50 years of the Industrial Revolution, real wages did not rise while GDP per capita rose quite a lot. So workers didn't benefit. So the Luddites were absolutely right. They were skilled craft people who lost their livelihoods completely. So that's an example of technology hurting people. But when politics takes control of technology, such as we saw after the Second World War, then everybody can benefit. This is a period when we still had technological progress. Aniket, you showed that chart of a GDP per capita growing, driven by productivity, but that was shared. Workers benefited. Inequality was really low. Wages tracked productivity increases, which tended to stop after 1980. And the world we're living, I would argue that the world we're living in today is more similar to the world of the early Industrial Revolution than, say, the post-war world of shared prosperity. And we have a situation where we have these technology oligarchs with complete control over AI shaping it in any way they want, with complete disregard for its implications for how this is going to affect jobs, wages, or economic growth or shared prosperity. And so when I hear tech oligarchs saying we're going to be living in this great utopia,
Yeah.
my question to them is, are you going to be willing to be taxed at a 90% rate to share the benefits of that growth with the broader population? And we know what their answer is. We know their answer, which is why I think we need to seize control over these technology platforms for the benefit of the population. So that's kind of where I come from.
Fascinating.
Yeah, I completely agree that the moment today is reminiscent of that moment. We actually did an episode about that moment, in particular, the end of the 19th century and some of the similarities of that period with today. And I think that one of the things that is striking is exactly this amount of concentration of wealth in the hands of very few. And we explained some of that back at that time with the fact that, for example, democracies were still imperfect and, in many places that weren't democracies, but even where the regimes were more democratic, not everybody had actual participation, not everybody was allowed to participate. And so there was a lot of democratic deficit at the time.
Mm.
I think that not that today we live in perfect democracies. I think that is one of the issues. Clearly, there's a lot of disenfranchisement. But I think that the other problem that we're living today is that we live in a world that comes on the tail of 40 years of a neoliberal revolution.
Yes.
And so I think that what this has produced is a number of things. I think it has anesthetized us to a lot of issues that are morally questionable, that we see and we observe around us. Clearly, income inequality is a very large one. And at the same time, we've been sort of sold the story that we shouldn't worry too much because all these moral issues, we should just delegate them to markets and markets will figure out a way, the efficient way
Mm.
to allocate resources, to distribute those resources, etc. And in fact, the type of economics that we've been taught in the 90s and the 2000s around economics departments around the world, the top economics departments, that was exactly it. It was literally like an indoctrination around this and how it is not even the job of economics to think about fairness. Like literally that was in textbooks that I have used, written
Yeah.
by people that, Tony, you have also encountered at the IMF. And so that's the world. So we live in that world where we have lost the ability to do any moral thinking about these big topics. And I
Yeah.
would also posit that, for example, the conversations about climate, you all know that that's something that I care a lot about, environmental issues, etc. I think that they've also anesthetized us to that, right? Like the fact that we debate and we have to find frameworks within which we can address environmental destruction and basically the destruction of the conditions that make human life on this planet possible. We have to address them within the confines of a discipline like economics, where we have to talk about trade-offs and we have to talk about is this the efficient way of doing it or not? Is this going to generate returns or not? Instead of having a conversation around, we should do this because without the ecosystem within which we live, we have nothing. We don't have air to breathe. If we don't have water to use, like it doesn't matter. Really, nothing
Yeah.
else matters. And
Yeah.
yet there's this artificial distinction in economics and nature and the environment is viewed as something external. And so that's ridiculous and dumb if you think about it. And yet that's how this discipline is taught. Lost the ability of moral thinking. We've delegated everything to markets and we treat all these forces as like external forces that we have no power to control. So I think that that's the mindset that we now find ourselves in this situation where we're facing really potentially quite an existential threat from this technology, right? You can view it as a threat or as an opportunity, but certainly
Yeah.
something that can be transformational. And we just have no framework within which to really approach it. And I'll end by saying one thing, that I think the main thing that's missing today from all these conversations in economics, but fundamentally in politics, which is what is the objective of our economy? What is the objective of all this? We've completely lost sight of what that objective is. I would argue that the objective of this economy should be the flourishing of human beings within a flourishing planet. And this is not at all what this is not the mindset our politicians have. This is not the mindset that academic economists have, like at all, at all, at all. The mindset is maximization of profit for companies, growth in GDP, which is clearly a very imperfect measure of wealth and well-being for people and planet. And so this is a very active mindset, and we're not having the conversation about what is this for, who is this for, and how is this leading to human flourishing.
Yeah. Let me add just one point, because Laura, you mentioned democracy.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting moment because we all know that Peter Thiel is on
Yeah.
record saying that democracy is not compatible with
Right.
capitalism because it affects his property rights. It
Right.
redistributes his wealth to the people he thinks are unworthy.
That's right.
He is the mentor of the current vice president of the United States.
That's true.
Another mentor of these people is Curtis Yarvin, this weird philosopher who thinks we should have a monarchy ruled over by a Silicon Valley CEO, not
Yeah.
democracy.
Yeah.
So these are the people with influence in the tech world today. So how the hell are we supposed to manage AI in a way that supports human flourishing in democratic conditions?
Right, when the whole concept of human dignity is denied, right? The idea that their utopian world is for all of us to be subject to some techno lord. Where's my human dignity? And their answer is, you are free to vote with your feet and go live somewhere else. Like, so I would have to abandon my relationships, my house, my, like, all the web of relationships that make human life possible and meaningful, because their vision of their utopia is one of subservience to the technology and to those who own that technology, crucially. So yeah, that's the vision.
So just a few things I love this, and I wanted to just ground some of what you said in some of the data that we pulled up for our presentation, and it echoes a lot of what you guys are saying, but some of the things that stood out to me. The first one, which is just mind-blowing to me, which is that a Pew Research survey from October of 25 shows that America is the most negative country in the world on AI. Let me repeat that to the listeners, because when I say this, it sort of gets dismissed by people. It's the most negative country in the world on this technology.
Yeah.
The country that has played arguably the biggest role in its creation, has definitely made the most money off of it, or wealth for sure. Not revenues, but in terms of wealth expansion has come from the United States. And the reason I think the three of us would agree is that the American people do not believe that the government will actually make sure that this technology is for shared prosperity, as you guys articulated. It's that Pew survey is very much linked to what you guys are talking about, which is a lack of faith in government. And it's interesting because I did a call with our amazing China tech analyst. I asked him about the political, like the social backlash to AI in China. And this gentleman said, look, in China, there is some fear for sure about replacement of jobs from AI, but the Chinese actually have much more faith in their government than the United States does. And the West has such a tough time believing this because they say, oh, authoritarian, how can that be?
Yeah.
But if you are a worker in America, and this is the second point I want to come to, and you have seen labor share of GDP decline, and Tony, to your point, you have not seen for 40 years it keep up with productivity. So who gives a shit if your productivity is going up? If you're not getting any, you're like, fuck it. I don't care about this, right? So it is sort of an interesting. So point number one is about where the U.S. falls in the linkage to faith in government, which I just think is very important. The second thing I wanted to just say in response to this moment is, one of the interesting things about the AI discussion right now is that many analysts are making the mistake of taking trends of the last 3 years and saying it's because of AI that trends of the last 3 years are happening, whereas in fact, those same trends were happening for the last 40 years. And this is, again, echoing the points you're making. Just to be clear, labor share of GDP has been falling for a long time, folks. Average workers have not been part of the productivity gains. So, this is actually a real analytical problem, because people are assigning to AI the causal power of something that AI is not the cause of. It is just a continuation of. And it leads to a very weird set of discussions. The discussion is, well, Aniket, my kid just graduated from college and they got a degree in this and that, and now they have a job that they didn't need a college degree for. And that's because of AI. No, no, no,
Mm,
no, no. That's not because of AI. That has been happening for 30 years. And Matt
yes.
Siegelman at the Burning Glass Institute has done this work very thoughtfully
Yes.
to show that people are doing jobs that they don't need those degrees
Yeah.
for and
Yeah.
for a long time. So that's the second thing I want to say. The third thing I wanted to just respond to you guys with just some of what's been on my mind is, to your point, Laura, your excellent point about the lack of ability to even have these conversations and to think about the world in this language. And as I was preparing for this big call that I did this week on AI, and I really became a student. I mean, I read probably 1,500 pages and
Yeah.
watched a lot of stuff. I really sort of tried to get deep on it. What amazed me was how over these last 10 years, 12 years, some of the good and the great of science, of technology, have warned people about this moment. And to your point, Laura, we don't even know how to integrate their warnings into the system. So,
Right.
Professor Jeffrey Hinton of the
Yeah.
University of Toronto, Nobel laureate, was
Yeah.
the godfather of much of modern AI. He's been going around the world for the last year saying, guys, this is some scary shit. We need to press pause.
Yeah.
Steve Wozniak
Yes.
and Elon Musk, and Elon is a controversial figure. How straight is he on this? Who knows? But I'm just saying, tech gurus who know a lot about this technology 2 years ago said, pause everything. Pause it. We just can't keep up with it. And Laura, just to your point about the lack of ability to integrate that thinking into decision making, it's like, wait, hold on. Wait, those people are saying that, but that is not an economic argument. They're making a non-economic argument and
Exactly.
therefore does not compute. Brain does not know how to
Yeah.
compute. Policy
Right.
does not know how to compute. We must keep going. And I
Yes.
see this, by the way, in my professional work all the time, where the number of people that I know who are shoving AI down the throats of their teams,
Yeah.
even though they know it's not adding its current iteration is not that valuable in day-to-day operations, but you just need to do it because that's the world we're in. And
Yeah.
you can't question technology and productivity in this
No.
very narrow sense of it. So anyways, I just wanted to add that to the way you guys are thinking as very real data points that animate a lot of what we're thinking about these
Yeah.
days.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting. Sorry, Tony, you want to go? I'll have some thoughts afterwards.
Yeah, I wanted just to raise another issue, which is the issue of displacement from the labor force. I mean, in some of these scenarios, of course, some of these scenarios say this is, as Anik had said, this is just a normal technological progress. Some people will lose their jobs, but other tasks will be created and the labor force and work will keep growing. So I think this is kind of the Darren Asimoglu view and people like that. But there are other people who say that, what's been happening to blue collar workers for the past 50 years,
Boom,
which nobody gave a shit about, by the
boom,
way,
Exactly.
boom.
now is coming for white collar workers. And suddenly everybody gives a shit about that because most commentators and pundits are white collar workers. So what happens? So you have tech oligarchs saying, oh, just a UBI, people will be fine. So I think back to Keynes in 1930 when he wrote his remarkable essay, Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren, when he predicted that productivity would, in 100 years, have risen by 4 to 8 times. And he was exactly right about that, by the way. But he thought that we'd only be working 15-hour weeks because we wouldn't need to work that much. And the rest of our time would be spent, I think the exact quote is, we'd be living wisely and agreeably and well. Wisely, agreeably, and well. Well, we've got some evidence of that, and Keynes, unfortunately, was a little bit off the mark because since the last 5 decades or so, we are seeing more and more prime age men dropping out of the labor force entirely, and these are mainly blue collar men displaced by technology and globalization and decline of unions. And Are they living wisely and agreeably in men? Well, not really. They're spending their time watching TV, playing video games, consuming pornography, using marijuana, trading cryptocurrency, engaging in far-right politics and dark corners of conspiracy theories on the internet. This is not living wisely and agreeably and well. So we
But
need to
Tony,
think more deeply about what it means when people are displaced from work,
so
because
so to,
bad stuff can happen.
so I just want to respond and say on the point number one of what you said, I think that's a brilliant point, and I would love to. You guys should interview a sociologist or a social historian who
Yeah.
probably wrote about what did blue collar workers actually think? What were they saying in the 70s or in the 80s? I've never seen an article. I'm sure there are many books about this of like, what was the view of those completely forgotten people who, you're right, Tony, like no one gave a shit about them. But I actually am curious, like, what were they even saying? I've never even heard a sentence from that person of 1830 who just got their job automated by industrial revolution technology. So that's one. The second thing I would say about the hours work, what got triggered in my mind was 15 years ago when I worked for Professor Sachs, I had to put this chart together, which I just quickly pulled up. I haven't pulled up this chart until now because you spurred the thing, which is just, I'm going to pull it up right now for those of you who are watching. It is hours worked per year in the OECD. Okay.
Mhm.
And I remember doing this chart for Jeff because it was just a fascinating chart. And I don't know, I'm not a labor economist, so I'm sure there's a lot more to this than what meets the eye. But it is amazing that Germany is at 1,335 hours worked per year. The US is at 1,800. So if you do 1,335 divided by 52, you get around 26 hours a week, as opposed to 40 hours a week, which is more of like what it's like in the US. And by the way, if you looked at this over time, I'm sure it was even more the case that that we were at 40, 50, 60 hours a week. So so maybe it is the case that we are actually able, some societies are in fact able to live agreeably at less hours. We're not at 15, but we're at 25 in Germany. Germany gets criticized by American media as being an absolute shithole, but it's not. I mean, Germany's actually a very fine,
No.
very advanced country and blah, blah, blah. But anyways, I'm just like, and I remember Tony and Laura, a few years ago, I wrote a lot about the 4-day work week in
Yeah.
the US. And Laura, you'll remember because when you were a client, you would see me writing about this stuff. And it's interesting because Europe is very much moving down the 4-day work week path.
Yeah.
So I guess my question to both of you is that was Keynes actually right about the 15 hours, but the element that is needed is what you guys are saying, that you need a political system that is able to redistribute the gains of this productivity so that we can all work a little bit less? Or was he wrong? I mean, I don't know. Maybe he had it right. He was just right about it in Germany and France and not in the US.
Yeah, I just two very quick points on that, and then I'll turn it over to you, Laura. So the battle for the 8-hour day was the big labor battle of the late 19th and early 20th century. And in the US, workers bled and died and were murdered by troops for fighting, going on strike for the 8-hour week. It
Yeah.
was a
I did not
very
know that.
bloody affair. Now, most countries granted the 8-hour week between 1917 and 1919 as a reward, given that it was an outcome of the First World War and the sacrifice, and also the fears that were thrown up by the Russian revolutions. Two countries that did not grant the 8-hour week at that time were the US and the UK. The US didn't grant it until FDR in the Fair Labor Act of 1938 granted the 40-hour week. So that's one point. The second point is, yes, if you look at the difference in GDP per capita between the US and Europe, almost all of it is driven by fewer hours worked in Europe. So I get sick and tired of people
Yes.
wringing their hands and moaning and groaning about Europe falling further and further behind. Well, first of all, that's just most of that is just exchange rate movements. It's fake, but most of it is due to a deliberate social choice to work
Yes.
fewer hours. And as you said, Aniket, people in those countries are much happier than in the US. And, the happiest countries in the world are the Scandinavian countries, as is shown every year in the World Happiness Report. So yes, I think Keynes was right to an extent that people can work far fewer hours and still be happy. The question is what happens if those hours go to zero? That's when I
Yes.
get worried.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that that's an important point because it sort of comes back to this. It comes back to human nature and the fact that I think that everybody needs a bit of a purpose in life.
Yes.
Everybody needs meaning, and work is one of the important ways that people find meaning. It's not the only one, but I think it is an important one. And so I think that what I would add to the conversation around a universal basic income, for example, which is something that's being talked about as a possible solution if we go into this singularity scenario of AI where AI will take all the jobs and do all the work for us, but also create immense amounts of wealth. So the first, as you guys mentioned earlier, is okay, but we do need to redistribute that wealth because otherwise it's concentrated in the hands of like literally 10 people. And how are we going to do that, right? So that's number one. But the second, I think, is also once you've found a political way to do that and you have established this UBI, I do think that there's a question around like how are our communities finding meaning and how are people finding meaning? And I think that that's a pretty relevant question, to be honest. And maybe it's great. Maybe we find a lot of time to do art and music and pursue hobbies and spend time with our loved ones, and that's great. But I do think that there's going to be a significant problem, like you said, Tony, of people just having too much time on their hands.
Yeah.
So
But
that's
but just on this point, Laura, like, I think it would be fascinating. Like, this is where anthropology could be very helpful. It's like,
yeah,
okay, what is a 25-year-old male in Germany who is sort of like unemployed or like underemployed and this and that? What is their day-to-day life like versus the
yeah,
25-year-old underemployed American and
yeah,
versus the 25 underemployed Indian versus the
yeah,
25, because because that might actually elucidate that there are ways to live a life that is one of what we call in today's parlance underemployment, but is still one with dignity and meaning and so on and
yeah,
so forth. So
yeah,
like
that's true.
Tony, like what you're saying about like the stereotype of the unemployed young man who is, watching porn and all this stuff. It doesn't have to be like that. And
No.
I'm not saying you're
No,
saying
it
that
doesn't have to
either,
be.
but
No,
there
no,
is
for sure.
another possibility.
For
The
sure.
other place where my mind goes is, do you guys I'm sure the three of us in our 12 years of friendship have talked about David Graeber and bullshit
Are you
jobs.
kidding
Yeah.
me, Aniket?
Okay,
He's like
okay,
one of my idols.
okay, okay. And have you guys talked about bullshit jobs on
We
your
haven't in this
podcast?
on this
No,
podcast,
not
but we
no.
should talk about
Yeah.
David Graeber
Okay.
and
Go
bullshit
for it.
jobs, which
Go
is
for it.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think for your listeners, David Graeber was this remarkable soul. I mean, he
Yeah.
was this remarkable human being who transcended politics, transcended ideology, and he was an anthropologist, grew up in New York, and was a professor at Yale, and then was kicked out
Yeah.
because he was in fact organizing graduate students to strike against the university. And so then he became a world famous anthropologist at the London School of Economics and became famous in the sort of mainstream because he coined the term "we are the 99%," and he was the provocateurs at Zuccotti Park during Occupy Wall Street. Anyway, so David Graeber, for all three of us, I think played a big role in our thinking, and certainly for me, he was like a hero. And by the way, again, he transcended politics. Like Tony mentioned Peter Thiel a few minutes ago. Your listeners should just Google David Graeber, Peter Thiel fireside chat. They did a fireside chat 20 years ago at a little library in California. And to see the respect that Peter Thiel had for David Graeber was just remarkable. And the day David Graeber died, he died when he was in his late 50s. The outpouring of eulogies on that day. It was unbelievable. I don't
Yeah.
know if you guys remember that, but it was just sort of
I
an
remember that
amazing
day.
week. Like
Yeah.
everyone was out. Anyways, so he wrote, why do I bring him up? Maybe 10 years ago, he wrote this little essay on this completely anonymous website. And he, in this essay, it was like a 1-page article, not even an essay, it was an article, 1 page. He asked the question, like, just first principles question, why do bullshit jobs exist?
Yeah.
It was that, and it was like, he was like, I have all these friends. He had this very like easy way about writing. He said, I have all these friends who have these desk jobs, office jobs, and they all tell me, and they say, David, like, I don't do anything at work all day.
Yeah.
And David's point as a student, and Graeber wrote a lot about the history of economics and the history of debt and the history of how our systems work. So he's like, that's interesting. Like in a capitalist system that should strive for efficiency, why are all my friends telling me that they don't do anything at work all day?
Yeah.
And so then he wrote this book called Bullshit Jobs, which was a New York Times bestseller. And he went in like a good anthropologist. He interviewed 400 or 500 people and asked them, like, what do you do all day? What, you only work 30% of the time? Wait, you sit at your computer and you twiddle your thumbs for half the time? Like, wait, you just have coffee with your neighbor, like your guy or gal whose office is next to you, and you go for walks? Like, that's sort of weird, right? And so he wrote this book, and his conclusion, this is a question for you guys, is because you guys are the moral thinkers, not me. But one of his conclusions is that bullshit jobs exist because of this morality that we have placed on work.
Yes, it's true.
And that if you're not working, you are not, quote unquote, contributing to society. And Laura, I remember when I was young, and if you ever meet my mom, which I hope you will, she'll echo this. I used to get so angry when people would say that my mom didn't work. It still fucking
Yeah.
pisses me off. My mom
Yeah.
stayed at home to take care of us, and they would say, Nara doesn't work. Fuck you. She does work.
Of
She
course.
works a really hard job, by the
Oh my
way. Like
God,
even
yes.
now I'm getting emotional about it because I remember it just really got her self-confidence down. But it was but Graeber's point is that we live in this society where morality, there's a moral value that we put to work, and that keeps everyone in place, and it keeps this feudal society in place. So I guess my question to you guys is, what's your response to that? Like, is there a moral binding in a not morality in a good way, morality in a bad way that keeps us tethered to the society that we should actually be breaking away from? Is a question that I wanted to get your thoughts on.
Do you want to start tackling this, Tony?
Yeah. I mean, I think Graeber had a point, and as somebody who worked in a large organization, I know a lot of work is bullshit work. Um,
Yes.
but I mean, I guess I would push back and I would say that the evidence does seem to support that people do find meaning and purpose in work. And we see this from various essays in the World Happiness Report, various moral philosophies emphasizing the dignity of work. People like Sherrod Brown in the US very much promotes that idea. Obviously, technology removed a lot of the really horrible, backbreaking work.
Yeah.
And that was clearly good, that kind of dangerous drudgery no longer exists. But it's also the case that, blue collar workers on assembly lines or even in coal mines felt that they were making a real decent contribution to society and they were justifiably proud of their work. Um, so the question is, I don't know what happens. I don't have a clear answer to this.
Yes.
But I do worry that Keynes was too optimistic when he said that we would all live wisely and agreeably and well. I think people would end up going into some dark places. And as I keep coming back to this, we're already seeing some of that with the displacement of prime age men from the US workforce. By the way, that's an American phenomenon. This displacement of prime age men we do not see in Europe, by the way.
Interesting.
Except Italy, by the way, Lara. Italy and the US
Interesting.
are the two countries where young men are, large numbers of them are not working. I think the reasons are different between both countries,
Yeah.
which we don't need to get into. But I think, are they pursuing higher cultural pursuits. I don't see much evidence of that, to be honest. They're watching
Right.
TV, they're playing video games.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the issue. I have some thoughts on this, and it's just more of a reflection that's been brewing in my head for some time. Because I also think that we need to make some distinctions. I do think that people find meaning and purpose in work, but I define work broadly, right? Being a
Yeah.
mom at home with children is a lot of work.
Yes.
Let me tell you, I had a period of time when I was in between babysitters, and those were the toughest months of my life. Let
Right,
me
right.
just put it this way.
Exactly.
It was a level of stress and work that I was telling myself, God, it would have been so much easier to be at my desk in some high risers in Hudson Yards than handling these two children and everything that comes with it. It's not just the two young children, it's like the activities and the schools and the obligations and everything that comes with it. So I define work quite broadly. It is not just the compensated work of a
Yeah.
white collar employee at a bank or something like that. So there's
Yes.
definitely dignity in a lot of that. And I think that, just back to the question and the intersection with artificial intelligence, and in particular the displacement of white collar workers, I've had this thought for a long time. I think since COVID hit and we were like cooped up in our apartments, and still working and trying to figure out what was going on, I personally was feeling I had a very significant feeling of dread, and I thought this is an existential moment. We could all die, etc. Like I really went into those dark places, and at my job at the time, the ask of us was, we need to reassure our clients that their money is okay. And, we need to help them make sense of markets today. And if you think about it, the entire system was more worried about people potentially panicking and losing money than the millions of people that were dying, like from a virus that we humans were
Uh,
not like prepared for. We didn't have antibodies for. So it seemed like the entire edifice was really focused on that versus taking care of the actual pandemic that was affecting human beings. And so I started having some thoughts in those days that were, I think the number one thought was, okay, I'm here at this job, these Wall Street jobs, fairly well paid, safe, like physically safe. Like it's not like we are in the way of danger on a daily basis, right? But is that really meaningful? And so I had that very, very, like, I just started sort of being obsessed with that thought. And the thing that I kept thinking about and going back to was, I think that what would be really meaningful would be for me to have some real practical skills. For example, I kept going back to this, and I'm not saying that this is for everybody, but for me, it was, I don't even know how to grow my food. Like if tomorrow, like if we can't access supermarkets, as we had some days when it was difficult, then I wouldn't even know. I don't have land. Like I don't know how to grow my food. I have zero skills that are actually practical skills that are like useful for surviving in a society that might be a little bit different from the one that I live in. And so that became a bit of an obsession. And I think it led to this thought in my head, which is our concept of progress. If you think about the way that we imagine progress in our society, it's technological progress, and it's also in the life of families, generation after generation. Is you come from an immigrant background, Aniket. I come from a background of a family that, up until my grandparents were farmers. I mean, they owned their own land, so that was something. They weren't like renting the land from somebody else, but they were farmers, like very simple people, not highly educated, etc. And their dream for their children, so for my dad and mom's generation, was that they would study and then get a white collar job, right? And then
mhm.
I'm the first generation. So my dad, if you will, was still like in that in-between generation where he grew up and he knows his way around a piece of land. He knows a lot about how to grow anything. Like he's amazing. He knows a lot about like practical skills, but he also had a very successful white collar managerial career, right? I am the first generation that's removed from that. And yet we count that as progress, right? For my grandparents, that would have been progress, like their dream, right? I wasn't tethered to the land in a way that made my livelihood dependent on that. And yet for me, that is a really major loss. It's a loss in so many different ways. It's a loss of skills. It's a loss of attachment, of meaning, of something that I feel really deeply that I don't have. And obviously I'm very grateful for everything that I've had in my life, but I am really mourning that loss. And I think that in a broader sense, sort of thinking more, not just about my case or the case of single families, but broader as a society, that also explains this feeling of detachment that we have towards the physical world. And so I sort of go back to that. And I think that that's a major loss that we've had as a society. So again, it's this flawed concept of progress, I think. There's others that talk about this and the fact that what we reward financially as professions today are exactly these professions that aren't really adding real value to humanity. It's just adding perhaps money in the pockets of the shareholders, but it's not really adding value to society. The teachers that educate our children are paid a pittance, and the hedge fund managers who work on arbitrage, in milliseconds between the price here and the price there, they're paid millions per year. Like, what's more valuable to society, right? Like, I'm sorry, but like providing liquidity to the market, I don't think is as valuable as educating a child. And so that's sort of the world that we're in today, and that's what we call progress. And I think coming back to AI, that's also one of the reasons why we find ourselves in this predicament.
When you were saying that, Laura, beautifully put, it reminded me of a book that I read maybe 15 years ago, 12 years ago, called Shop Class as Soulcraft. Have you
Oh
ever
yes, you
guys?
you told me about I actually gifted it to Jason. Yes.
Did you?
To my husband.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Tony, do you know this book?
I don't.
It
No.
was this PhD in philosophy from the University of Chicago, and he quits his job running a think tank to become a motorbike mechanic. And it's
Mm.
this beautiful, like 150-page, very short, elegant, very, very lightly written about the meaning that comes from working with your hands. And not just the meaning, but he also talks about the intellectual stimulation that comes from it. There's a kind of thinking that is
Yeah.
required of doing physical things that we dismiss, but is very important. And it reminded me when I was reading for my day job, when I was reading a bunch of stuff about, it's a bit of a it's not a non sequitur, but you'll have to stay with me for 10 seconds. I was reading, what's that guy's name? Who was the US trade rep under Trump one? The guy who wrote,
Not
Navarro?
Lighthizer?
no
Oh,
trade
Navarro.
no trade is
No,
free. No, Bob Lighthizer. So Bob
Lighthizer. Yeah.
Lighthizer was Trump's first, and he wrote this book about his views on trade. And one of the studies that people like him and Orrin Cass and that crowd, the sort of more protectionist
Yeah.
thinkers use, is this study which shows that so much innovation happens through physical manufacturing that when you get rid of the physical building of stuff,
Yeah.
you lose innovative capacity, because it's
Yeah.
only when your people are tinkering with stuff that
Yeah.
you innovate new ideas. And so I've been thinking about, actually, what you were saying right now just spurred that thought that, there is a way to think about some of these. It's not like a Luddite thing. It's to say that there's a different kind of development of the human that happens if you work with your hands. It may not be one that you see in GDP, but it happens in some other ways. And what's interesting is, like, guys, like my grandparents in India, they were significant players in the freedom movement, and the Gandhian movement. A big part of it was a
Yeah.
hand woven
Yeah.
cloth,
Yeah.
and it was this
Yeah.
idea that British industrial
Yeah.
manufacturing of
Yeah.
clothing was going to wipe out a lot of people's work, and it was considered, again, Luddite kind of thinking. But I almost wonder if there is a moral, which you guys can lead that discussion, like a moral discussion to be had about working
Yes.
with your hands that has
Yeah.
less physical output, but it allows for more meaning and, yeah, maybe more expensive goods. Like, maybe it costs more for that shirt,
Yeah.
but that's okay too. And Europe is
Exactly.
sort of does that, but like it's a different language around these things.
Yeah, I think that's true. And by the way, there's a concept. I read an article in the Financial Times a few weeks ago that kind of stayed with me, but there's this concept of decay of knowledge or knowledge decay. And so that's a phenomenon that's documented that, we might call something progress, but that actually implies the loss of knowledge in certain
Interesting.
areas. And one of the things that comes to mind to me, because of being sort of steeped in that world in the last year or so, is a lot of the traditional knowledge of indigenous peoples, for example, that's being lost because those people have been exterminated, assimilated, etc. And now we go back to that and we call it, for example, traditional ecological knowledge around how they managed their relationship as humans with the natural environment. sometimes in agriculture or forest management, etc. And now we go back to this, and we can explain today, with the knowledge that we have today scientifically, stuff that was done for hundreds and hundreds of years, if not thousands of years.
Yeah.
So they had that knowledge, right? But we thought that cannot be real knowledge because it wasn't something that we came up with and we can explain in a sort of controlled scientific experiment way or something like that. So lost for hundreds of years. And now we start to understand like how much of that made a lot of sense after, our Western world had to go and experiment and made a ton of other damages and then finally come to the conclusion that. So there's a concept of knowledge decay, and that's an
Yeah.
important one. If you look at architecture, there's this fixation around, we can't build these things anymore like the way that they used to. Just go to like an Art Nouveau house in Brussels or even just a brownstone in Brooklyn, the way that, things were done. We just simply don't have those capabilities because we have not valued that work. We have valued the automation and standardization of everything and, and mass production. And so now it's just gone and you don't get it back. So there's that. And by the way, that also dovetails with artificial intelligence. And that's something that people are concerned about, which is the fact that if you sort of outsource human thinking to these machines, what kind of decay of knowledge and ability, not just knowledge, but really intellectual ability, what does that do to the human brain? Because acquiring knowledge and skills takes effort. Humans don't want to spend that effort because it's just evolutionarily, like we want to conserve our energies. So we give that job to the machines. And what does that do to our brains? That's
Yeah.
another thing that people are very concerned about, which is one of the reasons why, as a parent, I want to keep AI as far away as possible from my children for a very long time. And even I use it sometimes for sure, but I tend to try and use it as little as possible. I don't
Correct.
use ChatGPT. I really try to say, like, I only use it for a specific task where it can save me some time, but it's something that I don't want to do it myself. I can't read a paper through an AI summary. I will not retain any information. I just can't. Like, I can't do
Exactly.
that. So that's just an example.
Laura and Tony, I know we're gonna end soon, and I have to run myself, but I just have two thoughts that I wanted, one quote and then one thought that I wanted to leave you guys with. One, the quote, which it brings Graeber and AI and all of this together that we've talked about, is one of my favorite quotes. David, you guys know it, I'm sure. Becky and I have T-shirts with this quote that we made for when we go to sleep in, and it's that the ultimate hidden truth of the world is that it is something that we make and could just as easily make differently.
That is Graeber, and it is an amazing quote.
Right? Isn't
I
that just like
love that quote.
it
Yeah.
brings agency back to us? And
Yes.
that was driving a lot of my AI presentation this week was like, we do get to decide
Yes.
these things.
Yes.
What you guys have, Tony, what your point I thought was brilliantly put. It was like, in times past, we decided to share this technology with everyone and the gains. And that was not even a faraway world. That was actually just 70 years ago.
Yeah.
And we go through these cycles. And I think reading Asimoglu and Johnson's, I have the book, but it's like this thick, and my brain is not able to read that long anymore. But I will try or listen to a podcast of theirs. The second thing that I was just thinking about as a moral question, which I think it would be wonderful for you guys to tackle at some point, is as I was preparing for my call, one of the things I started reading a lot about was the precautionary principle
Yeah.
and the concept of that. And it's for AI and Laura for our work on climate.
Exactly.
What I always say to our clients is that to me, the most interesting part of climate is the idea of tipping points, because if things get slightly warmer and things get slightly more floods and stuff, we
Yeah.
will adapt to it.
Yeah.
But you start hitting these tipping points and then
Yeah.
we have no
Yeah.
idea actually.
Yeah.
And I found as I get older, I find reading and rereading Nassim Taleb's work has
Yes.
been so hard because
Whew.
the Black Swan, we
Yeah.
underappreciate these low probability, high impact events. And so
Exactly.
I think there's like a decision making question about this, and there is a moral element to it. And the moral element of this is, the question of right and wrong. Is it okay to be precautionary when there's a small chance that something very bad happens? I mean, Michael Sandel, I remember watching some of his lectures about this stuff on the internet for his class Justice. It's sort of an interesting thing, and
Yeah.
I think people haven't linked precautionary principle into AI the way that they have on climate. And I think you guys could do that and we would all benefit from it.
I completely agree. And in fact, when I started reading the famous Amodei essay, I'm sorry that we didn't have a chance to talk about it today. I know that you've read it all, unlike
Yeah.
me. And so I wanted to hear your thoughts, but perhaps we can do a follow up on
Yeah.
some of these topics. One of the things that really stood out to me was that there was just no sense of that. Like there was no wording, no language around that precautionary principle.
Yes.
The conversation today is around, do we let this technology develop because we have to have an edge on technology or not? Like those are the two options. And it's like, well, again, right? Like where is a real analysis of like the risks here? Have we really thought about the risks and have we had this moral conversation? So I think that
Yes.
that's really important. And to David, I use that quote by David Graeber around imagination so much. And to me, that's been really transformational because it really opens possibilities and it breaks this false idea that we are stuck in this present and it's inevitable.
Exactly.
Because there are other possibilities and humans have experimented with a ton of possibilities in our history. There's nothing inevitable about the world we're in today. And so we need to ask these questions and we need to have imagination and we need to have moral imagination about where we can go and find communities that can help us make those changes. So I think that that's a really beautiful place to end, really emphasizing that possibility of imagination.
Yes.
We are
Amazing.
not stuck here. There's a world we can build and we can build it the way that we want it. And we really shouldn't let anybody tell us that that's not possible. And that's just, we have to get on this train or, forget about it and languish somewhere in a corner. That's not how it is. It's just not.
Such a weird, imagine if we had used that mindset at other junctures in history. It would have
Exactly.
been a very weird world we would live in. Right?
Exactly. And in fact, all the epic stories about like countries and heroes are about rejecting the world around you and trying to build something, imagining something, they're daring to imagine something different and then daring to find a way to build it. That's the important part.
And we live in a democracy.
Yeah.
Right.
And that implies that we should have democratic control over these technologies.
That's
right. I
Simple as
completely
that.
agree with that.
Simple as that. Simple
as that. Great.
All right.
What
Very
a great
good,
chat. Well, thank
Love
you
you
so
guys.
much.
Keep
Love you too, Aniket.
inspiring all of us, and thank you for having me. Really
And
Thank you
enjoyed
so
it.
much.
We'll bring you back for a follow-up conversation.
Yes,
Look
you'll
forward
have to
to
come
it.
back for several more
Anytime.
conversations. So
Anytime. All
Thank
right,
you
guys. You
so
take
much.
care.
All
thank
right,
you,
take care.
Aniket, and thanks everyone.
Thanks,
All right,
Laura.
thanks,
Bye.
everyone.